This is Paul Levy here, and it's a very breezy day here in Brighton in the UK. And I'd like to invite you to consider a challenge for teaching online, particularly where what you're essentially trying to do is sometimes known as blended learning. So what you may be doing as a teacher is having a live conference call with your students, or it may even be a recording that you're asking your students to watch, where what you're attempting to do is set them a task to do for the day, or perhaps for the next few days ahead, and they're at home and you're attempting to do this online. So you may be at home or you may be at school. And what you're noticing, and I've had this reported to me from a number of parents quite recently, which is that the children aren't really doing the task. The students are either partly doing it, rushing it, putting it off. And that's a problem, of course. And I'd like to suggest there may be a reason for that. And it's particularly around willpower or will force. Now, when you're in a classroom, a physical classroom, this can be difficult enough with some students anyway, who are finding it hard to self-manage, i.e. direct their own will. So you might set them some homework to do, a task maybe to do over the weekend or by the following week. And what happens is, of course, the child is now in a place of self-managed learning. It can be that their parents also are in on this process and they set the task. And that can be easier or harder. But certainly if you're setting them a task and then they have to decide when to do it, that's difficult. Now, I would suggest it's even harder when you are attempting to set that task to activate their will with your own will. You're asking them or telling them to do something by a certain time, and you're doing it on a platform such as Zoom. And that could be live, but you're saying by next time or by tomorrow or by next week, this is what I would like you to do. And you might follow that up with an email. And what I want to suggest to you is that if it's difficult enough to stimulate the will of a student in a physical room, it's nigh on impossible to do it with all students virtually via a digital platform. This attempt to stimulate will from the digital world is usually difficult, and particularly in children who find it hard to activate their own willpower to self-manage their own activity. They'll always find something easier to do. They will look for the immediate gratification of anything but that task, particularly if there are lots and lots of other things available to them, like watching TV or like gaming. And so it doesn't matter how idealistic you are, if you are attempting to activate their will to do a task that you directly set, you may well find and may well have already found that they're only half-heartedly doing it, or they haven't done it. And they'll sort of nod, and you might get one-word answers when you ask how they've done it, and you might be seeking feedback. And one or two of the students who don't have this issue may well have done it. But in a lot of cases, they've been just following the temptations of other things and not really doing the task, or minimizing the task. And that's a problem. And the problem is, I think, the nature of the digital world. And it's quite hard to know what it is actually in it. But it could be that we're already one step removed when we're digital, that I'm not physically present. And that just makes the problem that's often there worse anyway, which is by the time the children have got home and you're asking them to do something, they can easily forget it, or they can put it off if they're allowed to do things that they enjoy more. And then they leave it to the last minute, or the excuses come about having forgotten to do it, or I wasn't sure what the task was. Well, online, this is a little bit of an echo. There's a sort of ghostly figure on the screen asking them to do something, and it doesn't transfer very easily or very well. It isn't physical to physical, it's digital to physical, and there's a sense of you being a kind of phantom, a kind of shade. Now, this is just one little suggestion of how you may be able to offset that problem of digital to physical. And it is to set a task that's very simple, but the main task that you actually give the student is a choice. And when they make that choice, they're going to find that their own will is a bit stronger, because choosing things, having options, sometimes engages students. They feel more free and they can feel more engaged when they feel they have a little bit more power. So when you set a task, instead of just saying, by Wednesday, I want you to do X, what you could do is say, by Wednesday, I'd like you to choose something. I'd like you to decide on doing X, Y, or Z, but I want you to choose one of them, and we are going to check back, but I'll be really interested in your choice too. That might sound a little bit like a trick, but it's not really intended to do that. It's trying to strengthen the relationship between you and the will force of the child when you're not there. And so if you actually say, instead of, I would like you to read X by Wednesday, you might say, now, there are 3 stories and I'd like you to choose one and read that by Wednesday. And you can then also maximize the chances they'll choose one, because the 3 different stories you might get them to read may favor one child's like or preference over another. So you might say there's 3 very different stories here. Now, they might still meet the same pedagogical requirement and stimulate their imagination or get them learning about a particular theme. You could also change, and you might say, particularly, what I would like you to do is to read something, or write about something, or draw something, or research something. And you can vary those tasks over time. But again, I would suggest having this choice does this, is that you do a very gentle but very clear act, which is to say, I want you to do something, but that something becomes something that will activate the child's own will in their own space, and actually you're already modeling the idea they need to self-manage, but they're not only going down one path. They've got the option to kind of awaken their own decision-making process. Choose 1 or 2 or 3. And I think what you might find in most cases that more gets done, because that act of decision-making is physically in the room. And is more intense when we make choices. We tend to strengthen our will. We tend to procrastinate a little bit. But ultimately, if you're strong on the idea of, I want you to make a choice rather than I want you to do X, and X could be quite complicated, you pass over the simplicity of I want you to make a choice, which is understood by so many people as a simple task, but actually one that will then engage them and engage their will. And you might then find that you can transfer a more simple request that is more likely to be carried out by the student.